Welcome to Yin and Young. The following is a story taken from Chapter 3. I have called it A Final Farewell, Family Meal and Funeral for Nainai. I hope you enjoy it. One day in April, Yinlin came home to find her mother in the eating area with Kaijiao. Her mum sat with a strange look on her face. As Yinlin bounded through the door to drop her things, Juyu said, "Don't go in there, daughter." Yinlin stopped abruptly. Obediently, she sat at the table and looked at her mother. Yinlin's face showed expectation and openness, awaiting her mother's explanation. Had Yinlin done something wrong, she wondered? Not likely. Her face did not seem angry. This was a different expression, similar to anger, but softer. Yinlin's mother said, "Get me a piece of that watermelon, will you?" Yinlin got the watermelon and handed it to her mother, who held it to Kaijiao's lips. Kaijiao mouthed around the fruit quietly. "Where's Nainai?" Yinlin asked. "She's in her bed," replied Juyu. "Oh," Yinlin replied. It was normal for Nainai to take a nap in the afternoons, but usually she was awake when Yinlin came home. "Yinlin, Nainai is not going to wake up," Juyu said. "She died today." "Died?" Yinlin replied. "Yes." "That means she will not wake up?" "Yes." "Oh," thought Yinlin. Her mother's emotion was hard to read, and Yinlin didn't really know how to react. It wasn't so long ago when Yinlin thought her mum was dying, and she remembered how scary that was. But during that time, her mum was shouting out in pain. Now her Nainai was actually dead, but everything was calm. Yinlin didn't feel anything. It just seemed like a normal afternoon, and Nainai was taking a nap. "Some men will be coming soon," Juyu said. "They will take Nainai. Your father's coming, and we will say goodbye to Nainai in a few days." Soon enough the men came to the door, carrying a long wooden box. Yinlin's mother directed them into the room with a few words, and they quickly removed the body from the bed and went back out the door. "I want you to hold your sister for a few minutes. I'm going to tidy things up in there. You just stay out here." Yinlin's mother cleared the sheets off the bed and took the curtain down from the bed frame. She put the old sheets and blankets in a pile and began to gather all of Nainai's clothes and personal items from the various drawers and hiding places. Some items were put on one pile, and other items, such as Nainai's jade headpiece, Juyu kept for herself and put away in some new hiding spot. As Nainai's things accumulated in piles, Juyu then began to pack them into baskets. Juyu also began packing for Yinlin, Kaijiao, and herself. They were going on a trip. Qianlong appeared at the door, and after a brief fatherly exchange with Yinlin and Kaijiao, he and several other soldiers started to dismantle Nainai's old bed and carry all her belongings out to the back of a truck. Within an hour, everyone loaded up. The younger soldiers were in the back. Qianlong was at the wheel. Juyu sat in the center with Kaijiao on her knee, and Yinlin sat next to the window. Along the way, there wasn't much talking, but after the soldiers were dropped off, Yinlin asked where they were going. "We're going back to Nainai's house in the country," Juyu said, "the place where I grew up." Yinlin had vague memories of Nainai's old place, as they hadn't visited since Uncle Wei died. After Ye died and Nainai moved in with Juyu and Qianlong, it was thought best that Luai and her 2 kids move into the big house and keep the place up. Yinlin's mom asked if she remembered her Uncle Juwei. Yinlin nodded, but actually she didn't remember much. "He loved you so, so much," Juyu said. "You know the poem above your bed? He wrote that for you." Yes, Yinlin thought, she heard this from her mother several times. The poem was written by her uncle's own hand. Yinlin didn't remember much about her uncle, but she remembered the stories about him and the turtle. Shortly after Ye and Nainai moved to the country, a dispute arose between them and Uncle Wei. Wu Wen and Zhu Zheng did not try to hide their spite against Lu Ai, Yinlin's aunt. They thought she was too tricky to capture their son Wu Wei and cause him to give up all his privilege by moving to the country. In their view, a move to the country was like committing suicide, because he gave up his Shanghai status and benefits, all for the sake of having a divorced woman. If he hadn't made such a stupid decision, Wu Wen and Zhu Zheng might have been able to stay in the city, not be cast out like trash. Lu Ai could feel their spite, and because of this, it wasn't long before a silence separated Ye and Nainai from their child. Despite being both neighbors and family, they went years without saying a word to each other, not even a pleasant greeting. However, all this changed when Yinlin was born. Whenever Juyu and Yinlin came for a visit, they would be sure to stop by Uncle Wei's home. "He thought you were so cute. I don't know why. Your uncle carried you everywhere and treated you as his own child. I guess you were like the daughter he never had." Yinlin heard this before, but listened politely anyway. "You were impossible, actually. Crying all night and sleeping all day. I never got any rest, and then had to work all day. It's amazing I had another child. I'm so glad Kaijiao's better behaved." Juyu wasn't exactly accusing her daughter of deliberately making her life difficult, but that is how it sounded to Yinlin. She felt bad whenever her mother spoke about how poorly she behaved. "So your uncle wrote the poem to help you sleep." The poem was a familiar one to Chinese people. It translates to English as, "My home has a crying baby all night. I hope she will sleep till morning light." In Chinese it is concise and rhythmical. Yinlin's uncle placed the poem above the bed as a charm over Yinlin. Actually, he copied the poem again and again and posted it here and there. When Juyu returned home, he provided her several copies, urging her mum to read the poem as much as possible, so that Yinlin might sleep better. Uncle Wei also played with her during the day, and gave a break to Juyu, who could enjoy her visits with the family, which usually meant that she busied herself making a feast for everyone. But these became family times, and served to soften relations between Wei, Lu Ai, and Juyu's parents. "It's too bad he isn't still here," Juyu continued. "Such a stupid man," she complained. "If he hadn't left the city, life might have been easier, and then he wouldn't get the cancer." Juyu also was not beyond blaming her brother for his marriage choice, but the blame and anger was also a sign of care. Yinlin remembered how much her mother tried to help her brother, even if superstition was the only thing she could turn to. Juyu brought a turtle into the home and put it on her brother's tummy, believing that the longevity and tenacity of the turtle might pass into her brother. Each evening they performed a kind of ritual where her uncle would lay down, and Juyu placed the turtle on his tummy, while tearfully whispering to the turtle, asking him to please share his strength with her brother. Uncle and turtle, belly to belly. After 3 days, Yinlin's mother found the turtle dead in the pot they kept it in. 3 was generally thought to be a lucky number, so Juyu hoped this was a positive sign. Perhaps the turtle really did pass its life force on to her brother. Juyu didn't think it would be appropriate to eat the turtle after such a gift, and she was afraid that others might discover it and turn it into food, so she had her brother bury the turtle, and hoped that this action would make their respect official. The thought hadn't occurred to her that since the turtle died, it perhaps didn't have enough life force to pass on to Wu Wei, who also died several months later. "But you never cried at his funeral," Juyu said. "Don't you miss him?" But Yinlin was still very much a young child, and even younger when her uncle died. All she remembered about him was the image she had in her mind of her mother placing the turtle on her brother's tummy. She recalled the angry sadness of her mother, recalled her mother's tears, and her uncle looking up to the ceiling, a tender intimacy with the turtle, and with death. Yinlin and her family arrived at Nainai's home in the country before the others. Lu Ai was there, of course, and so was her eldest son, Zhu Wujian, and his wife Hui Guang, who was pregnant at the time with their first child, but not yet showing. Uncle Wujian stayed at home and farmed the land while his younger brother Tengfei was in the city, just finishing his chemistry degree. Wu Jian helped Qianlong unload the truck while Hui Guang provided a light meal. Juyu unpacked and got things settled in her old room, while Yinlin watched over Kaijiao. Qianlong busied himself with rebuilding Nainai's rosewood bed. As evening set in, Yinlin was put to bed while Qianlong and Juyu visited outside with Yinlin's aunt and cousin. Yinlin woke up the next morning to the arrival sounds of more family. She came out of the room to see her uncle Ju Xiaobo, his wife Song Chunhua, and their daughter Ju Luhong coming through the entryway with their things. Yinlin spotted Luhong. They both smiled and waved to each other. Yinlin and her family often visited her cousin in Shanghai, who was a little younger than Yinlin. Uncle Xiaobo had also been in the military, though he now worked as a construction foreman. His wife worked together with him as a secretary, managing his files and customers. Yinlin's mother and father greeted them at the door, making them feel welcome and getting them settled. It was going to be a busy day, however, and after Yinlin and Lu Hong had their congee, Juyu soon had the two of them folding yellow longevity papers into little gold bars. Juyu demonstrated how it should be done. She told the girls that each fold must be carefully and slowly made, and that it should be done in a showy fashion. It was important that the gods see how much care is put into every fold. Juyu told them to make as many gold bars as possible. These were going to be sent with Nainai to her new home. Xiaobo was the one who picked up Nainai's ashes the previous day. He had set up candles and incense beside her urn at his home on the shelf, and kept Nainai company all through the night. Shortly after arriving, he carefully passed the burial urn, which was wrapped in a bright white cloth, to Qianlong, who had prepared a place in Juyu's old room where her ashes could be kept. Qianlong took his turn at watching. Morning passed to noon, then afternoon. Yinlin's other aunt and uncle arrived. Zhengya and Donghai were both teachers who lived in the country with their 3 children, 2 daughters, Meihui and Jinghua, who were both older than Yinlin by 8 and 6 years, and their one boy, Tingguan, who was only 2 years older than Yinlin. They took rooms in Juwei's old home just down the lane, and had already unpacked. After greeting everyone, they too joined in the preparations. There was something for everyone to do, especially in the kitchen. Vegetables needed chopping, dough needed mixing. Meihui, the eldest of the 3 newly arrived cousins, and her sister Jinghua, took care of Kaijiao while the 2 aunties, Yinlin's mother and cousin Huiguang, worked on food preparation. The early stages of the day involved a lot of soaking, beans, rice, and bamboo leaves. Seasonings were prepared next, and soon the boiling and frying got underway. There was no central planning exactly, but Juyu tended to notice when things were not getting done. She minded the others and made suggestions while busying herself with dough for dumplings. Huiguang prepared the bamboo, soaked the beans, and seasoned the pork. Aunt Chunhua was also good at noticing what needed doing, and would comment at times if she thought an ingredient was missing, or if a little less of something might taste better. She made sure that no one went hungry or thirsty through the day. Luai busied herself in the background. She took care of the cooking pots and utensils. If she needed help, she got Wu Jian to gather whatever was needed from the old house. Once everyone in the kitchen was tended to, she joined Zhengya with preparation of the clothes for mourning. This was a big job and required making the patterns, cutting and sewing the cloth tailored to fit each member of the funeral party. Zhengya recruited her 2 daughters to help whenever they had a free hand, and as the day progressed and food items were settled, the other women from the kitchen joined in the sewing. During all this time there was a calmness and efficiency about the preparation that kept conversations subdued and warm. They spoke about events at home, their work or business, changes taking place in the country, relationships, goings-on with the neighbors, as well as hopes and fears for the future. Their conversation not only seasoned the food, blending together with the smells from the kitchen, but it threaded the funeral cloth as well. The mood and order of the day was alive with cooperation and intensity of purpose. Incense from Nainai's room reminded everyone of the hope that Nainai would enjoy this final time with everyone together. The work lasted longer than the conversation, as darkness fell unnoticed. The women checked on the food to make sure nothing was overlooked. Final alterations were made with funeral outfits, and one by one the children were sent to bed or dozed off. The men continued to stay with Nainai. Donghai stayed till the middle of the night, at which time Qianlong took over the spot, until Zhu Xiaobo resumed duties in the morning, allowing Qianlong to get refreshed for the ceremony. Yinlin was awakened the next morning and was told to wash and get dressed. Her mother and father were already in their white funeral outfits, and Qianlong held Kaijia while Juyu helped Yinlin with her outfit. Soon Yinlin and the rest of the family were outside. Yinlin saw that everyone wore the same white outfit over their normal clothes. It was a white burlap cloth, and included a head covering as well as white booties worn over the feet. The general impression was that of the KKK gathering for a cross-burning. Uncle Xiaobo came out of the house cradling Nainai's urn in his arms, and took a place at the front of the line. The rest of the family fell into place along with a few others from the community, who had been made aware of the funeral today. The sky was clear and there was a crispness to the air which would soon warm under the rising April sun. As the group began its procession south toward the river, musicians hired for the purpose began playing their instruments. The clatter of the sona, cymbals, and tambourines let everyone in the neighborhood know that a funeral entourage was passing by. Nainai's home was not far from the river, and after a short walk along the powdered road, the group came to a clearing on the west side of the path, somewhat sheltered by a group of trees. The area was unevenly grassy with alternating patches of hardened clay surface. As Yinlin looked around, it was clear that someone had prepared this area early in the morning. Uncle Xiaobo went directly to the front, walking behind the center table, and gently placed the urn, still wrapped in white cloth, on the pedestal. With the sun rising behind their backs, the white cloth shone with brilliance. Behind and to the right of the urn, a long stick planted in the ground had a large white character poster proclaiming, "Your soul returns to its native place, riding the back of a crane to western paradise." Below the urn and spread all around the front of the square table were dishes of fruit, each dish of apples, pears, and oranges, arranged to form little pyramids. Among the fruits, also set on serving dishes, were a roasted chicken, duck, and a pork hock roasted to a golden sheen. Of course, there was a bowl of rice and a glass of both wine and tea. In the center sat a medium-sized clay pot with fine sand inside it and 2 large joss sticks placed within the sand. 2 red candles stood on either side of the table. Below and forward of the table was a large metal tub or burning pit, and beside it a small metal container of gasoline. All told, there were 3 tables. The square center table on which the funerary urn was mounted, and a rectangular table on either side of the square one, branching forward to the mourners like wings. All tables had white cloth covering the length of the surface and hanging down at the ends. White and yellow chrysanthemums were mounted all around the edges of the tables. The table to the right had a couple of baskets. One basket had Nainai's bed sheets neatly folded. Another basket had some of her favorite clothes. Yinlin observed these baskets and also saw a smaller basket containing the gold bars that she and Lu Hong had folded the previous day. It looked like some other larger bars were there as well, probably folded by the adults. Beside the gold bars was arranged a pile of hell money, all stacked in tight bundles. On the near end of the table was a large cooking pot with a lid and many small soup bowls and spoons. The table on the left of the urn had several flower arrangements and a loose pile of white irises. Closest to the urn was a large stack of joss sticks and a few boxes of matches. The neighborhood guests placed blankets, pieces of precious cloth, or flowers on the near end of this table before finding a seat toward the rear. Once everyone was seated, Ju Wuzhen rose and stood in the front of the center table. Cousin Wu Zhen was selected to start the ceremony as a representative of the eldest, but already deceased son Wu Wei. The musicians continued their brash performance, playing even louder, causing an almost hypnotic numbness to overtake the attendees. Turning his back to the people seated and facing the urn at the front, Wu Zhen pressed his hands together in front of his forehead and bowed 3 times. Then he stepped toward the table on the left, picking up a box of matches. Lighting one, he then lit each of the candles on either side of the table. Then, taking the large joss sticks out of the pot in which they stood, Wu Zhen lit them simultaneously using the flame of the candle on the left. Holding the joss sticks between his palms, he returned to the center place and repeated the gesture of bowing 3 times. Moving forward, he stuck the joss sticks back in the potted sand. Then, turning, he returned to his seat. During this whole time the clatter and clash of the musicians had been playing, but when Wu Zhen sat down, the music stopped. The candles flickered, and the sweet smell of incense floated along the breeze. At that moment Yinlin became alert with wonder. After the clattering sound of music, and all the chatting and moving about, everything was suddenly still. It was so quiet that you could hear people going about their daily business off in the distance, and nearby birds twittering their morning tweets. It was quiet enough to hear the gentle breezes of the morning as they wafted through the tablecloths and flowers, each little petal wavering gently in the air. And the white the white cloth at the ends of the table, and the character cloth hanging behind the urn, all waving gently, the edges of the cloth shimmering golden light. Yinlin felt a surreal sense of liminality. Nothing was as it seemed. Looking sideways at her father, Yinlin realized that he was wearing his uniform underneath the funeral cloth. She could tell that it was pressed and his boots were shining. He looked very handsome and dignified. In those days, a soldier's uniform was unmatched in quality and workmanship, and represented the height of style. If people had known of Gucci at the time, they would have considered the uniform to be superior. You could not buy better cloth anywhere. Only soldiers had such excellent tailoring, and only superior soldiers, such as her father, could get the highest quality with the most pockets. Her mother, too, as an officer's wife, was wearing an army skirt and a beret with the red star on it. Yinlin was reminded once again of what a hero her father was to give them this elevated life. Following this, Uncle Xiaobo stood toward the front and directed each mourner to come up in groups. First to come up was Uncle Wei's family. It was just 3 of them, and Wu Zhen had come up again to join his mother Lu Ai and his wife Wei Guang. Together they stood in a line with Wu Zhen in the center, Lu Ai on the left, and Hui Guang on the right. Uncle Xiaobo handed each of them 2 joss sticks. The 2 ladies each advanced to the candle nearest them to light their joss sticks. Then Wu Zhen lit his. Together the 3 of them placed the joss sticks between their palms, and repeated the process of bowing, and then adding their incense to the clay pot in front. Family by family came up and repeated the procedure. Yinlin's mother burned 4 sticks, 2 for herself, and then 2 again for Kaijiao, which she did by holding the sticks between the infant's palms and performing the actions for her. When this part of the ceremony was complete, the sweet and pungent smell of incense from the many lit joss sticks hovered thickly in the air. It was now time for the farewell meal. Yinlin's mother got up. Handing Kaijiao to Qianlong, she proceeded toward the large cooking pot on the right. Auntie Zhengya and her 2 daughters followed. Both Yinlin's mother and Aunt Zhengya dished cold noodles into small bowls and motioned that the children begin distributing the noodles. Meihui took the first bowl up to the center table. Holding the little bowl between both hands, she bowed 3 times, then placed the bowl of soup in front of Nainai's urn among the other foods. The remaining children gathered the filled bowls and delivered the soup and spoon to each of the other funeral participants. The children were spilling, however, and Aunt Zhengya told them to slow down. Aunt Chunhua noticed and urged Lu Hong to join the other children to help with the serving, and Lu Hong waved to Yinlin as well. Everyone was served and quietly murmured to each other while eating their noodles. It wasn't long before everyone finished. The children gathered the bowls back up, tossing any leftover noodles into the burning drum. Yinlin hadn't eaten any breakfast till now and was disappointed. She was hungry, and the little bit of cold noodles did not satisfy. Xiaobo again assumed his place at the front and invited Qianlong to bring the dried corn stalks to the metal tub for burning. Qianlong then placed Nainai's bedding on top of the stalks, and then again Nainai's favorite clothes. Donghai also came up at this time, and Xiaobo and Donghai together dumped the fruit, cooked meats, and everything else except the candles, incense, and urn into the pile. Donghai was responsible for pouring the gasoline on top of the clothes, bed sheets, corn stalks, and all the food. Everything was soaked. Qianlong grabbed the box of matches, and in one motion both struck the match and tossed it into the pile. There was a loud woof, and a large flame suddenly arose. The men quickly jumped back and then watched as the pile of belongings were suddenly consumed in flame, emitting a dirty brown and black smoke that wafted heavily among the mourners, stinging the eyes of some and bringing a bitter taste to their tongues. One of the aunties came up and began to throw ghost money into the fire. Yinlin noticed a loud and agonizing cry coming from Lu Ai first, but not only her. The other aunties joined in also, including her mother, each of them slowly fingering the hell money and tossing it into the fire, each of them wailing aloud. Even Juyu seemed to stagger at times, her arms and hands shaking. Yinlin was stunned. What happened? At first they were in the beautiful sunlight with white cloth and incense. Then they were quietly eating with Nainai, and now all the loud tears and smelly smoke. After a few minutes the aunties waved to their daughters to come up. Yinlin too came, and her mother handed her some of the gold bars they had folded earlier and whispered sharply in her ear, "Yinlin, you need to cry." Yinlin looked around. She couldn't cry. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. It felt weird. She tried a few times, opening her mouth to make a hoo, hoo sound, but it was no use. She stared across at her cousins, who almost instantly began howling and shouting with wide-mouthed grimaces, wiping their tears, imitating their mothers, and throwing the hell money and the gold bars into the fire. Yinlin got smoke in her eyes, and this caused her to have some tears. She wiped the tears, but there was no crying. She stood there watching the aunties and her cousins, wishing she could sit down. Then Lu Ai turned and bowed 3 times toward the urn, with her body shaking and her head bent down. She cried aloud to Wu Wen, saying, "We will miss you, Mother Wen. We will miss you. You were so good, Mother, to us. We will miss you." Aunt Lu Ai seemed to be almost screeching her final words. Yinlin again stared in puzzlement. As a young girl growing up, she heard how much Nainai and Ye despised Lu Ai, even blaming the early death of their son on her. And now she's saying she will miss Nainai, and showing so much emotion. "So good, Mother," Lu Ai continued. She stood there facing the urn, with loud racking sobs, and a look one could easily confuse with anger had it not been a funeral. After a minute or two of this, she calmed herself, and turned back to the barrel, and the procedure of fingering and meditatively tossing one after another bill of ghost money into the fire. Next came Auntie Chunhua. She turned toward the urn, but instead of a standing bow, she got down on all 4s and lowered her head to the ground, back up to kneeling, then down to the ground and back up 3 times. But Auntie Chunhua was quiet. She just knelt there, covering her mouth with one hand, and the other arm crossed over her chest. From time to time she swiped her eyes right and left, clearing the stream of tears that kept coming. The aunties began quieting down, at which point Juyu took her turn in front of the urn. She bowed 3 times, then began talking softly but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you remember, Mum, how everything changed when we moved to the country? Do you remember how much we suffered?" She paused, thinking, and then more quietly, "It was so long ago now. I hardly remember when Baba still owned his business. But we had each other, didn't we? And even though I had to work hard, we still had good cooking and a clean home, right? I was so happy to wash your feet, Mom. I will miss that. Juyu trailed off into silence again. Looking down, she thought a bit. Then looking up, do you remember when you first met Tianlong? Chen gave Baba 30 renminbi, and Baba didn't know what to do with it. I always remember his look. We told him he should go down to town like in the old times. And he took the boat. He took the boat on this river. Went into the city. He could do whatever he wanted. Things he was never able to do for so many years. Oh, how handsome he looked when he came back with his hair cut and shiny. Remember that? But he came back with almost all the money. He was gone all day doing what? Smoking a water pipe, he said. And he brought back some steamed pork buns for us. Chen, that was such a lovely gift, she said, turning back to her husband, then again to Nainai. But I don't know why Baba didn't enjoy it more. Staring into the fire, Yinlin remembered a dream she had of Nainai the night before. She set aside the memory, however, so she could listen to her mum. The world stopped as daughter listened to daughter, saying a loving goodbye to her mother. Yinlin looked up. Yinlin would, in the coming years, learn to see that her mother had both a great capacity for tenderness, as well as overwhelming force and power to get what she wanted. But this moment, with the sun shining and the smoke sometimes enveloping her mother, and everyone listening to the story, this scene stuck with Yinlin all her life. The memory returned once when, as a teen, Yinlin watched a movie at the theater. In this movie, the Chinese Communist Party conquered the city and told the whores, "You go to work, don't sell yourself." The communists had decided that it was time to teach the prostitutes to be good citizens, which of course meant giving up their trade. But the whores just did not cooperate. They said, "Oh, so dirty, I don't want to do it." And there was a man who had been a guest in the local whorehouses, and he also had the same experience as Yinlin's grandfather. He had all of his wealth taken away. So that day, just like Yinlin's mother described at the funeral, he also had lots of money. He had 5 yuan. And when he came to his old place, he saw one of the whores he had known, and she was sitting on the street. "Oh, what are you doing?" he asked. She said, "I'm going to work. Look at my hands." She had already been working for several years, and the hardship showed not only on her hands but in the way she was dressed. She was almost unrecognizable, but the old man remembered. And he said, "It's okay. It's okay. Let me take you to have some buns." So then they sat in the small restaurant, and the man ordered 2 buns and gave one to her. He said, "You eat it." He was so careful with all the small dishes, pouring the vinegar very elegantly, serving her. Together the 2 of them ate. It was a moment of enjoyment, the sweet and subtle pleasure of life displayed on both their faces. Watching this, Yinlin recalled the day at the funeral and remembered what her mum said about Yeye. She thought it should be the same. He so missed this kind of life. For him it was valuable to pay that money to treat his old friend. And the whore also was so touched to be lifted even temporarily from the misery of her daily life. And so, when he was taken away by the police because he was reported as going to the whorehouse, which was criminal, then she cried out for him, saying, "No, no, no, no! He's a good guy!" Yinlin never knew her grandfather. He died early. But Yinlin guessed that this is how he felt when he brought the buns home. Maybe he just wanted to sit, dip the bun in the vinegar, and just, the good life comes back. But the communist soldiers never understood this. They would say, "What a capitalist enjoyment, you selfish people, always taking pleasure in material goods." Of course, Yinlin was too young yet to have these reflections. She just absorbed her mother's words and saved them to ponder another day. Her mother continued talking about how good that day was, her and Mom and Baba, enjoying the pork buns and vinegar together. It was a beautiful day, similar to today. And now, Mum, you will go on the river too. I wish you a safe journey and happiness. As Juyu spoke these final words, Xiaobo resumed poking the items in the fire, making sure that everything was completely consumed. Suddenly, Zhengia spoke up with a gasp. "I just remember a dream I had. I saw Mum, and she was packing for a trip. She came into my room and asked if I saw her blue slippers. I said I'd look for them." At that moment, Yinlin too recalled her dream. It was similar, but in her dream, Yinlin was lying in bed and Nainai was looking through her drawers. "What are you looking for, Nainai?" she asked. "My blue silk slippers. Have you seen them?" Yinlin spoke up and said, "I dreamt Nainai was looking for her blue shoes too." Yinlin's mother slapped Yinlin's arm, saying, "Keep quiet, you. Not even crying. Now you're going to talk nonsense." But Zhengia looked at Yinlin and said, "Really? You also had a dream?" Yinlin nodded her head, but then glanced at her own mother, who frowned but said nothing. Luai called her son, "Wuzhen, hurry up. Go back to the house. Look for Nainai's blue slippers." Qianlong spoke up. "There's a basket just inside the door of her room. The slippers are in there, under some old jackets." Wuzhen hurried and was back before the fire died out. He passed the slippers to Zhengia, who motioned to Yinlin that she should come to the fire quickly. Aunt Zhengia bent down, and with a kind smile said to Yinlin, "Nainai asked for your help too. Let's throw them in together, okay?" She offered one of the soft shoes to Yinlin, who looked up at her mother for confirmation, but Juyu looked away. Yinlin turned and accepted the shoe. "Together with me, okay?" Zhengia said to Yinlin. "Ready?" Yinlin nodded. "Here you go, Mum. We brought you the slippers you were looking for." "Here you go, Nainai," Yinlin repeated, and threw the shoe in the fire. The slippers were actually well worn, and this was one reason why they were not included with the other items placed in the fire earlier. They burned easily. The piles of hell money that remained, the longevity papers, both gold and silver, were all handled and caressed by the ants, and then Uncle Xiaobo took the whole lot and dumped them in the fire. Soon enough the flames started dying down, and the aunties exhausted both their tears and their stories, taking their daughters back to sit down. Uncle Xiaobo motioned to Tingguan and Wuzhen that they come up to the fire, and handed each of them a stack of firecrackers. Wuzhen motioned to Tingguan that he toss the bundle of firecrackers into the flame. When they began their raucous popping and cracking noises, Tingguan jumped in fright, and then laughter. Eagerly he turned to get another bundle, and another. Meanwhile the girls and the aunties had gotten to a point where they had little emotion left. The sound of firecrackers was annoying, and they could hardly bear any more stimulation. all except Yinlin, who wanted to toss the firecrackers also, but Juyu grabbed her arm with a frown, preventing her from joining the play. The sound of firecrackers signaled it was time to take the ashes to the river. The somber mood shifted as people quietly chattered amongst themselves on the way down to the water's edge. This return to socialization and a sense of normalcy caused everyone's mood to lift. A boat was waiting there. It was not very large, but large enough to take the funeral coterie, which was composed of only family members. The rest of the community said their farewells and went back to their homes or work. Someone shouted out that the guests should return at 2:30 for the feast. People nodded and waved or bowed. The boat moved slowly, drifting a fair distance from shore, when Xiaobo unwrapped the urn, exposing a shiny black box. He drew a metal tool from his pocket and pried the box open. Twisting his body around and reaching low below the bow of the boat, he released the ash into the water. "Goodbye, Mum," he said. Most of the ash went straight into the water. There was some plooping and plopping, and a little cloud of smaller particles drifted into the air. It blended with Yinlin's memory of the paper ashes fluttering about in the breeze. Xiaobo tapped the box a little, shaking whatever dust didn't want to come out, then turned back into the boat. Looking relieved, he placed the white cloth into the box, set the cover back on top, and, looking around, said, "Let's go home." The relief on Uncle Xiaobo's face spread to everyone else. The remainder of the day would be much gayer and festive time. Already the aunties' minds were busy planning the dishes they would serve and the final preparations they had to make. The uncles and nephews sat outside smoking or just catching a quiet moment, and the nieces were recruited to help in the kitchen. Yinlin was surprised to see how the entryway, where the ancestors' spirit tablets were displayed, had been all cleaned up and reorganized. It didn't look as scary as it used to. And now the wall had a picture on it, not just tablets. At the very top was an image of Chairman Mao, and below him was a soul tablet with the name Old Ancestor painted there. Below this were 2 generations of previous ancestors, and now in the spot beside Zhu Zheng's tablet, Wu Wen's fresh-cut and painted tablet was also firmly placed. Cups of tea had been set out, and candles were burning. Yinlin and her family entered the home by pausing and bowing 3 times once again. But now Nainai had become part of the ancestors. The entryway that had been so scary to Juyu in her childhood and so dirty to Yinlin was now cleaned up and looked very dignified. The rest of the afternoon people passed by this display several times, no longer bowing but feasting. They alternated between laughter and arguments about old family grievances. Some of them sang songs, others told jokes. Children ran about hiding from each other, stopping occasionally to grab something sweet or salty to eat. It was rare to have such an abundance of food, and everyone enjoyed themselves to the fullest. Actually, it is difficult to describe the mood of the meal, because the facts given here are not accurately portrayed. In fact, there was no laughter, and no joke-telling. There was no singing of songs. Such behavior was not appropriate. The children might have been running around and laughing, but the parents would have shushed them. However, despite external appearances, the internal feeling was quite light. There was a palpable sense of relief and happiness, as well as great pleasure in the food and being together. Regardless of social propriety, inwardly they were joking, laughing, and singing. Uncle Xiaobo was outside with Wu Jian. He had given the funerary urn to Wu Jian, who smashed it on a rock, tossing the wood and the white cloth into another flame outside. While this last remnant from the funeral turned to smoke and drifted into the late afternoon sky, every family member was subtly aware that the ancestors were watching over them. Heaven mixing with earth, happy eating mixed with tears, like a wedding, the questions of life and death resolved, at least on this day. After the cleanup, late though it was, everyone gathered their things and departed for home. As each one passed the ancestors one last time, they paused, bowing 3 times. Then, turning to go, they took a fen out of a bowl filled with water. Yinlin's father told her that she should save this coin. Its purpose was to wipe away tears, remove all guilt, and promise wealth in the future. Yinlin was already happy. She had enjoyed the time with her family, and she was still full from the feasting that afternoon. And each family took bundles of food for leftovers. However, the coin didn't seem to work very well, because on the drive back to their home, Yinlin's mother had more tears to shed. As she watched through the window to the moon outside, she recalled her days sleeping by the roadside, her memory made fresh by the return visit to her old home. Her tears fell fast and hard. "You'll never know, Chen Chen, how much I suffered," she whispered. "You'll never know." Then back again to showy, self-absorbed tears. Yinlin pitied her mother, but was tired of all the emotion of the day. She wondered how her mother could spend a whole day mourning the loss of Nainai, and then have more tears for herself. She also wondered if her mother would ever know how much her father suffered during his teenage starvation. Yinlin already knew that her parents had suffered when they were young. Such stories darkened the night sky of many a moonlit night. Then, as if Juyu heard Yinlin's thoughts, she looked sideways at Yinlin and with a frown said, "Nainai loved you so much, but you didn't shed one tear. Ah, ungrateful." Yinlin, who hoped to escape the guilty feeling about her lack of tears at the funeral, was now once again buried in it. Actually, she felt really sad when she thought about Nainai, and the activities of the day helped to relieve her of the sadness. But her mother's tears and her accusations brought all the sadness back. Yet, for some reason she didn't understand, Yinlin couldn't cry. She wanted to cry, actually, but the tears her cousins shed were fake. She didn't believe them, especially when she saw how happy they looked after the funeral. That night, in the quiet of her own bedroom, Yinlin had a physical memory of Nainai in her bed, across the room, as real as a phantom limb. She whispered across the dark expanse, "Good night, Nainai." Yinlin lay her head down, and a tear trickled down her cheek. Then, as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Yinlin stared at the darkened patch of room that had once been Nainai's place. She kept watch all night, washing her sadness away with tears. When the sun began to peek over the horizon, Yinlin finally fell asleep.